Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, today on the Dungeon Dive, we are going to conclude this new little series on playing Shadows of Brimstone as a solo RPG. And I guess the question that I have had, or the question that I came to at the end of this session was, am I playing Shadows of Brimstone, or am I playing Hexcrawl? Because this adventure has lasted me about 7.5 hours, I would say, spread out over a few days. And in that 7.5 hours, I have gone on exactly one dungeon crawl. And I've gone into one mine. I have spent the vast majority of my time in this adventure, and it has been amazing. I've had so much fun, but I've spent the vast majority of my time in the Hexcrawl portion of the Hexcrawl fan expansion, and focusing on that, focusing on my time in towns and in my time adventuring. And I will, at the end of this video, I will have some final thoughts on this process. Right now, we're going to get into a little bit of session recap of what happened at the end of our last session and at the beginning of this session I just finished. And then I will kind of go through a little bit of a detailed examination of the final battle between Eli, Cornelia. We had a couple of henchmen that we were able to convince to join us, and against the possessed preacher, the corrupt sheriff, and the 3 deputized bandits. So in the last adventure, in the last session, I was down here in the mountain range, right outside of Stone's Crossing, and we were looking for the lost city of gold and doing some treasure hunting so we could get some gold in order to fund our hunt for the possessed preacher. We ended up being attacked by some mountain yeti, but we escaped them. We found the lost city of gold, and we ended up finding some gold, and we ended up escaping from the lost city before it collapsed. And let's see, all of that happened around December 28th. And then on December 29th, we decided to head north, following the road, following the lead that we had, searching for the possessed preacher. We were searching for actually the sheriff's office where the corrupt sheriff was protecting the possessed preacher. That was our final goal for this campaign. So we moved up through and into the town of Alderville. We had no encounter on that day. We arrived in the town of Alderville. It was a mining town, and it actually ended up using mutant slaves for the work. So as we entered in the town, a runaway cart hauling supplies came barreling down the street, and we were able to dodge that. And before the cart was hit a wall and crumbled, Eli was able to grab some whiskey from the cart so he could heal some of his sanity there. So once in town, after the excitement of the runaway cart, Cornelia, she decided to go to the blacksmith to sell her rune void. And Eli decided to go to the mutant quarters to check in on the morale of the situation of them being held like slaves. So let's see, Cornelia, she went to the blacksmith, and she asked the blacksmith if she knew anything about the rune void that we found, if maybe he knew that the rumor that it was part of that standing stone that was outside of Stone's Crossing that was attracting the undead, and he didn't really know anything about it. And so we just ended up selling him the standing stone, and we decided to call it a day at the blacksmith. They were short on supplies, and the prices were just too high for us to afford anything at that time. So Eli, he went to the mutant quarters to check in on the morale of the situation. And some mutant families were really distraught, and they asked for some money for some help. And so Eli gave them 40 gold, and he ended up talking to a leader, the leader of the mutants, and he wanted to know what the situation was. Did they need saving? Were their numbers great enough to help push against the people of Alderville. If we helped to save them, would they be able to hold on to their freedom with their numbers? And sadly, the mutant leaders said no. They didn't have the willpower at this time to rise up because things were so bad. And so we said, well, maybe we will be back. But while we were talking to the mutant leader in Alderville, a bootlicking mutant heard us talk of revolt, and he wanted to go and tell the local law enforcement at the frontier outpost about what he had heard. But Eli confronted him and paid him 10 gold in order to not say anything. We rolled a pretty good result on the fate dice. And so the bootlicking mutant decided to keep his mouth shut. Thank God. I did not want to run into that kind of situation and have another town being against us right now, at least. Okay, so December 30th, we woke up in Alderville. There was no wilderness encounter for that day. But early in the morning, there was a mining blast accident. The general store lost a bunch of its extra supplies. So we didn't have any more discount that we had the day before. And the town was more concerned about the supplies that they had lost than the loss of the mutant life. With the mutant numbers being even shorter in supply now and their morale being down even further, Eli and Cornelia, we knew that there was just nothing we could do at this time to help the mutants. So we very depressingly went to the general store, bought a few supplies, and left the town. And we decided to head north up through Fringe. Okay, so December 31st, we head out of Alderville. We're continuing along the north road here, and we come into Fort Lopez, but we decide to just pass through. But once we get through Fort Lopez, our chain of Mephistopheles started glowing. This was a chain that was kept the possessed preacher, or kept the spirit that possessed the preacher captured. And this chain broke, and the spirit left the mine, and it went back into the city of Larberg's Landing. It possessed the preacher, and then the chain started glowing. So we figured that we were getting close. I rolled up on my fate die system here for my oracle, and I rolled a result that made me draw a fate token from the chaos bag, and I drew the one and only boon that was in there. So I figured I would have a better chance of finding the possessed preacher and the corrupt sheriff in the town of Fringe. And it actually ended up happening. I rolled a 3, and that is exactly what I needed as far as my searching to find the sheriff's office. And so we arrive into Fringe. The chain begins to glow even stronger. January 1st is when we arrived. And I wanted to know if the possessed priest would feel the presence of the chain of Mephistopheles, the one that imprisoned the evil spirit possessing him. I rolled up a ++ blank. So I interpreted that in our favor, of course. So I said no, that the possessed preacher did not know that we were in the town of Fringe. So we were able to mill about being undetected. During that morning, a fire broke out in the camp. Eli and Cornelia worked together to put the fire out unharmed. And we ended up getting a reward for that of 150 gold. And we found a really cool dusty poncho. So now we're kind of like a team here with, we have Eli in his weathered poncho and Cornelia in her dusty poncho. So we're like the poncho posse there now. All right, so Cornelia decided to go to the mutant quarters, and there was a mutant quarters in Fringe as well, and there was also an Indian trading post. And so Cornelia went to the mutant quarters and trying to see if maybe she could convince them to help us fight against the possessed preacher and the corrupt sheriff. And if they did so, we promised to take them back and lead a revolt in Alderville to help free the mutant slaves there. We were able to, I did a cunning check for that and a fate check. And Cornelia rolled 1 success and a 1+ on the fate system. So I figured that she was able to convince the mutants for help. and I paid them a $40 because they were asking for some money for some food. And then we received one mutant henchman to help us in the final battle. So Eli, he went to the Indian trading post to wondering if there were any tribal allies there that were willing to help. For that, I did a spirit and a fate test for Eli, and Eli had 1 success and 1 plus on the fate dice. So they offered to help in exchange for a favor. And I said that the favor would be that we would take the next job offering and donate all the rewards or whatever good things we had, we would give to the local tribe. And that was for, let's see, the job that I rolled up was we need to go out now and we need to search some towns for an evil man who has been causing trouble for the tribal people and basically assassinate them. And for that, we received a tribal person as a henchman as well. So we had 2 henchmen. So our posse against our final confrontation of the possessed preacher, the corrupt sheriff, and his 3 deputized bandits ended up being Eli, Cornelia, and a henchman that was a tribal person and a mutant. And we ended up having this great final battle in the streets of Fringe. It ended up being so cool. It was like straight out of Dark Tower or something, with Roland and his quartet facing off against various beings and stuff. I used for the possessed preacher, I used the void sorcerer, and the void sorcerer ended up conjuring in some tentacles with some magic. For the bandits, I used the bandit sheet, and I said that all 3 of them had to be killed before I could face off against the corrupt sheriff. And for the corrupt sheriff, I used the backside. I used the brutal bandits for the corrupt sheriff. And we ended up winning. It was a really cool fight. I ended up having some pretty lucky die rolls. And Eli ended up pretty much unscathed, just a couple points of sanity damage. Cornelia is kind of worst for the wear, so she's going to need to rest up a bit. But yeah, overall, I had an absolute blast with this with this system, with playing Shadows of Brimstone like this. So I'm going to now we're going to go into a little bit of a detail about the final battle, to talk a little bit about combat, and then we're going to follow up with some final thoughts on playing Shadows of Brimstone, or just playing Hexcrawl in this manner. Okay, so this isn't going to be an actual blow-by-blow of the final confrontation, but just a little bit of a detailed discussion on it with some still images that you're going to see that I took while I was having this final combat. So like I said, our posse consisted of Eli, we had a mutant henchman, we had a tribal person henchman, and we had Cornelia. And we were facing off against the possessed preacher, and the possessed preacher was represented as a void sorcerer. And we were also against the corrupt sheriff and his group of deputized bandits. So the battle ended up going pretty well, actually. The first casualty was the first wounds were caused against the mutant henchman, who took a hit from the bandits. And then Eli used his Hellfire Ring. And for the Hellfire Ring, to kind of simulate the map attack, I decided to use the Hellfire Ring against the group of bandits and the corrupt sheriff. And I rolled a d4 to see how many of the group it would hit, and I ended up rolling a 4, but I only did damage to the bandits because I had this rule that the bandits needed to be killed before I could kill the corrupt sheriff. They were his meat shields, basically. So I ended up doing quite a bit of damage to the bandits, and I think only one ended up living, and one of them actually had some wounds. So that was pretty cool. That was a really nice use of the Hellfire Ring there. After that, I think Cornelia, she ended up taking a shot with her Gravedigger. And this was, I think, probably the only time this Gravedigger really did what it was supposed to do. I rolled a double crit and ended up just completely blasting the last bandit away, leaving only the corrupted sheriff. On the next round of combat, the corrupted sheriff took a pot shot at the mutant henchman, killing the mutant henchman, unfortunately. And then the Void Sorcerer ended up casting Void Chant, and this was a spell that would make the its next spell even more powerful. So that I was a little nervous about that. And then Eli just completely whiffed with his carbine rifle, rolling a 2 and a 1 and a 1. So that was really bad. And then the Gravedigger came up with Cornelia pulling the trigger on that. She had 1 hit and 1 miss, and then she rolled a 1 for damage. So that was pretty bad there. That was a total whiff of a turn. But my tribal person, henchman, he got really lucky with a critical strike and a normal shot against the corrupt sheriff. And the corrupt sheriff took a few wounds there. And then the corrupt sheriff did a really nasty attack against Cornelia, doing a critical wound and a 5 and hitting another wound. And she was actually able to defend against all 3 hits of the critical wound, but she ended up taking, or the critical hit, I should say, but she ended up taking some wounds from the normal hit there. And then the Void Sorcerer ended up casting Persecution. And because of the Void Chant, it ended up being at level 2. And so all of the heroes took a bunch of horror and corruption hits. It was pretty bad. And then the battle continued after that pretty by the books. Lots of exchanges of fire. It was a full range attack, or full ranged battle. I wanted this battle to take place in the streets of Fringe. And I was imagining it like a great battle in Stephen King's The Dark Tower, with Roland and his quartet facing off against these nasty enemies and shooting, and the whole thing, kind of like the battle, the gunfight at the OK Corral. I'm imagining that it barely took any time at all, just maybe a couple minutes of extreme fighting. Finally, we were able to kill the corrupt sheriff, and then it was time to cast the spell, to use the spell scroll. And so to use the spell scroll, I said that we had to make a spirit test, and we had to roll a 6. And Cornelia failed on her spirit roll. She only rolled a 3. But then the Void Sorcerer, on its next turn, it conjured up a tentacle, and the tentacle was an ambush attack, and I believe it ambushed the henchman. But then Eli was able to use the spell scroll, and he rolled the 6 that we needed, and so now we could do damage directly to the Void Sorcerer. We cast the spell. The chains of Mephistopheles were glowing super bright. It was just blinding holy light that just wanted to recapture the possessed spirit, or the spirit that was possessing the preacher. Once again, Cornelia whiffed with her Gravedigger. Cornelia was having a really hard time balancing her sanity and her wounds and just getting into the fight. She was just taking too much damage. But yeah, it ended up being a really cool fight. And finally, Eli landed the killing blow with a nice shot. And you'll see some images here with some other images of the fight. And I had a lot of fun. This was a really, really cool experience. Okay, so now it is time for a final recap. I had so much fun playing Shadows of Brimstone in this way. However, that question remains. Was I playing Shadows of Brimstone, or was I playing Hexcrawl? And I think that answer is I was playing more of Hexcrawl, but I was using Shadows of Brimstone as the guiding rules to create the game. I wasn't just playing make-believe, because I was still using probably 80% of the rules for Shadows of Brimstone. The main thing that I wasn't participating in was the dungeon crawling of Shadows of Brimstone. And I didn't really feel like I was missing anything. I had so much fun traveling the land, having random encounters out during the hex crawl, going from town to town. piecing together a story based on the locations in each town. I loved that connection between Alderville and Fringe. How Alderville was a mining town that was using mutants as slaves. So there was a mutant quarter there, and then in Fringe there was another mutant quarter. And being able to connect those two towns with that plot, that plot line was a lot of fun for me. And being able to promise the mutants in Fringe that if they helped us in this final battle, that we would come back to Alderville in order to free the slaves down there and maybe destroy the corrupt people of Alderville. That is really cool because what it did is I finished up this part of this adventure of this campaign of defeating the corrupt sheriff and the possessed priest. But now I have two kind of cliffhanging things that I can move on to. I can go on that quest for the tribal people of Fringe and find that guy who's giving them a hard time in one of the towns around Brimstone and assassinate him. Or I right now could head down to Alderville and help out the mutants down there. So I've planted seeds for future adventures. And neither of those involve dungeon crawling. Both of those things mainly just involve hex crawling. And I'm wondering how much dungeon crawling I'm actually going to do as I continue to play Shadows of Brimstone in this way. And I will continue to play Shadows of Brimstone in this manner. As a matter of fact, I am going to box up all of my tiles and my miniatures in a nice sturdy plastic boxes, and I'm going to put those up in the attic. It'll help me remove some things from my shelves that I am never using, that I haven't used in a long time. And it will kind of condense my Shadows of Brimstone experience down to something that can easily fit on this small gaming table. It's still a lot of stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong. You know, you could play a solo RPG with a similar experience with a couple pieces of paper and a 20-page rule book. I'm still using a ton of stuff from the game, so I am not saying that this is some easily stripped down system or some easily stripped down experience that anybody could have. You still need to have quite a bit of stuff in order to play the game like this. But I think as I continue to experiment with playing Shadows of Brimstone Hexcrawl in this manner, more and more things might continue to get stripped out. Maybe I will further abstract the dungeon crawling portion. Maybe using paper and drawing the maps rather than using the maps. I'm not sure. But I do know that I am greatly looking forward to continuing the adventures of Eli and Cornelia. I have had a ton of fun. This has been the most fun Shadows of Brimstone experience I've ever had, and it's already a game that I like a lot. I'm just discovering new ways to like it more. You know, can I now say that Shadows? I know it's a weird thing. It's such a customized experience that I'm having with all of this stuff, but I still do feel like I am playing Shadows of Brimstone a little bit, and I still feel like I'm playing Hexcrawl a lot. And those are the things. I'm focusing on the things that I really do love about Shadows of Brimstone, and that's the theme. That's the world, that's the lore, that's the stuff, that's the artifacts and all the encounters and the gear and having the random encounters in town, having the different bandits and the different henchmen that you can hire, all the cool enemies that you get to face, and just all of the stuff that inspires me. That all of these things, every single piece. Every single component of Shadows of Brimstone is a dot. It can be a narrative dot. And using my imagination, using dice, using oracle systems, using all of these various elements to connect those dots into a cohesive and entertaining story is something that that's my favorite thing about Shadows of Brimstone. And the way that this story was created while I was playing, and with also with some hindsight of looking back. Okay, so how can we fit this in? How can we make this work going forward? It's just been a really good experience, and this is the way that I am going to play Shadows of Brimstone from now on. But once again, I'm not saying this is the only way. I'm not saying like, oh, everybody just get rid of your map tiles and minis and just play Shadows of Brimstone like this. I know that I would never convince 90% of Shadows of Brimstone fans to do that, and I wouldn't even want to. I just wanted to create the kind of game that I wanted to experience. So I hope you guys enjoyed taking a look at Shadows of Brimstone and Hexcrawl as a solo RPG. And I hope maybe I inspired you to play Shadows of Brimstone in this manner, or maybe another board game that you have a bunch of stuff with. I was thinking, Arkham Horror 2nd Edition could also be a game that you could very much play in this manner. And I think it would work in a similar fashion. So, all right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. Have a good one. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.